Your attention is not just a mental resource, it is the single most valuable currency you possess in the modern world. Let me say that again with absolute clarity. Your attention is your life. Everything you experience, everything you build, every relationship you nurture, and every ambitious goal you ever achieve is a direct consequence of what you choose to pay attention to. Yet right now, you are hemorrhaging this currency every single second of the day. You sit down at your desk with the noble intention of finishing a critical, career-defining project. You tell yourself that today is the day you will finally make real progress. But within 90 seconds, a quiet ping chimes on your phone. You tell yourself you will just take a 5-second glance. That 5-second glance pulls you into an email thread, which leads to a social media notification, which leads to a browser tab with breaking news, which leads to a sudden urge to clean your desk or check the refrigerator. 45 minutes vanish into the void. Your brain feels foggy, your energy is drained, and the important task remains untouched. You feel a heavy, sinking wave of guilt and frustration. You ask yourself why you lack discipline, why you cannot just sit down and do the work, and why you keep falling into the same exhausting trap day after day. Here is the brutal truth that modern culture hides from you. You do not have a discipline problem. You have an attention management crisis. Your brain is not broken. It is operating on ancient evolutionary hardware that was never designed for an infinite digital stimulation. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors survived in an environment where novelty meant survival. A sudden rustle in the bushes, a flash of color in the trees, or a change in the wind was a matter of life and death. The brain developed a powerful mechanism known as the novelty bias, a built-in neurochemical reward system that floods your nervous system with dopamine every time you encounter something new. In a primitive wilderness, this novelty bias kept you alive, but in today's world, hyper-capitalized digital platforms, algorithmically engineered notifications, and endless content feeds have weaponized this ancient survival mechanism against you. Every time you switch tabs, check an alert, or refresh a feed, your brain gets a cheap, hollow microdose of dopamine. You are not actively choosing to be distracted. Your primitive brain is being hijacked by an environment engineered to keep you constantly scattered, reactive, and mentally exhausted. This continuous state of fragmented focus comes with a staggering, invisible cost that is quietly sabotaging your entire life. In cognitive neuroscience, this cost is called the attention residue effect. Every time you switch your attention from your major task to a quick interruption, even if that interruption lasts only 2 seconds, a part of your working memory remains stuck on the distraction. Your brain cannot instantaneously flip a switch and return to full cognitive depth. It takes an average of 20 minutes for your prefrontal cortex to fully regain its original depth of focus. After a single distraction. If you check your phone or glance at an inbox every 10 minutes, your brain is living in a permanent state of cognitive hangover. You never actually reach your full intellectual power. You spend your entire workday operating at a fraction of your mental capacity, producing shallow, mediocre work while expending 3 times the mental energy required to do it. You end your day exhausted, not because you performed deep, meaningful work, but because your brain was forced to continuously restart its cognitive engine hundreds of times. The top 1% of high achievers, master creators, and elite thinkers understand a fundamental secret that the rest of the world ignores. They know that raw talent, high intelligence, and long working hours mean nothing if your attention is scattered across 1,000 trivial inputs. They have mastered the rare, weaponized skill of hyperfocus, the deliberate, uncompromising ability to direct the entirety of their mental bandwidth onto a single, high-leverage objective until it is conquered, while ruthlessly starving every competing distraction. Hyperfocus is not about brute force willpower, and it is not about forcing yourself to stare at a screen in misery. It is a systematic biological practice of clearing your attentional space, managing your cognitive load, and creating the precise environmental conditions that allow your mind to enter an effortless state of deep, uninterrupted flow. When you enter hyperfocus, your perception of time shifts, your self-doubt vanishes, and your cognitive processing speed accelerates exponentially. Tasks that used to take weeks of painful, fragmented effort are executed in a matter of hours with surgical precision and exceptional quality. By the time you finish this audio experience, you will no longer be a passive victim of digital noise. You will hold the exact psychological frameworks, environmental design protocols, and neuroscience-backed tools to command your attention like a precision laser, turning your mind into an unstoppable engine of high-value achievement. The noise of the world is about to fade away. Your journey into the extraordinary power of absolute focus begins right now. To understand how to command this state of hyperfocus at will, you must first become intimately familiar with the primary operating terrain of your conscious mind, what cognitive scientists define as your attentional space. Imagine your working memory not as an infinite storage room, but as a small, brightly lit physical stage inside your mind. The spotlight shining down on this stage represents your active, conscious awareness, while the actors standing on the platform represent the thoughts, tasks, sensory inputs, and emotional concerns you are actively processing right now. Here is the fundamental biological limitation that determines your daily productivity. This stage has an extremely small physical capacity. Your prefrontal cortex can only hold an average of 4 distinct pieces of information under spotlight simultaneously before the system experiences acute cognitive overload. Every single actor standing on that stage requires a measurable amount of your brain's limited glucose and metabolic energy to remain active. Consider what your attentional stage looks like during an ordinary, chaotic workday. You have the critical report you need to write standing near the center, but sharing the spotlight with that report is the urgent text message you just received from a family member, the lingering anxiety about an upcoming financial deadline, the unread notification badge flashing on your second monitor, and the ambient noise of conversations echoing through your hallway. With 5 or 6 heavy actors crammed onto a platform designed for 4, your attentional space becomes a chaotic, unmanaged mob. The spotlight flickers frantically, bouncing from one actor to another in milliseconds. Because no single thought receives the full, uninterrupted illumination of your cognitive power, your brain is incapable of forming complex neural connections or generating deep, creative breakthroughs. You are forcing your mind to perform high-stakes intellectual acrobatics in a crowded, noisy basement. The sovereign master approaches the attentional stage with ruthless, uncompromising architectural discipline. You recognize that achieving hyperfocus is not about trying to shine a brighter light on a crowded stage. It is about systematically clearing every irrelevant actor off the platform until only one high-value objective remains standing beneath the spotlight. When you initiate a hyperfocus session, you do not allow your critical project to share cognitive real estate with open email tabs, unread notifications, or vague worries. You execute a complete external cognitive dump. You take a physical notepad and write down every single lingering thought, pending errand, and emotional anxiety currently draining your working memory, effectively moving those actors off the mental stage and storing them safely on paper, where your brain knows they will not be forgotten. This simple somatic action instantly frees up your working memory capacity, allowing your prefrontal cortex to direct 100% of its metabolic energy toward the primary objective. Once your attentional space is completely cleared, you must understand the critical mechanism of the 4-phase hyperfocus loop.
choosing a high-leverage object of attention, eliminating every external and internal distraction trigger, focusing your spotlight exclusively on that target, and continuously drawing your awareness back the moment your mind naturally begins to wander. That final step is where true mental mastery is forged. The uncalibrated mind believes that a successful focus session means never experiencing a single wandering thought. When they notice their mind drifting toward a distraction after 10 minutes of work, they experience a wave of frustration, criticize themselves for having weak willpower, and surrender to the distraction entirely. This is a severe misunderstanding of basic human neurology. Your brain is an organic pattern-matching machine that will naturally generate wandering thoughts every few minutes as it scans for novelty and comfort. The master of focus does not view a wandering mind as a personal failure or a sign of broken discipline. You view it with absolute clinical curiosity. The moment you notice that your spotlight has drifted away from your primary task and wandered toward an irrelevant thought or a digital impulse, you treat that exact moment of meta-awareness as a major neurological victory. That instant of conscious realization is the precise moment your prefrontal cortex reclaims control from your primitive default mode network. You do not judge the thought, you do not beat yourself up, and you do not engage with the distraction. You simply acknowledge where your attention went, take a slow, rhythmic breath to reset your autonomic baseline, and calmly guide the spotlight right back to the central task. Every single time you execute this gentle, deliberate redirection, you are physically strengthening the executive control circuits in your brain, training your neural architecture to sustain longer, deeper periods of absolute concentration with effortless grace. To convert your attentional stage from a vulnerable target into an impenetrable fortress, we must now engineer the physical and digital boundaries of your working environment through the protocol of friction architecture. Most productivity advice makes the fatal assumption that you can maintain intense, uninterrupted concentration while surrounded by high-convenience distractions. They tell you to simply exercise more willpower when your smartphone is sitting directly next to your dominant hand, buzzing with every incoming message, or when your internet browser has 5 social media platforms pinned to your bookmarks bar. This is a profound misunderstanding of human behavioral design. Willpower is not an infinite moral virtue, it is a depletable metabolic battery that rapidly drains every time you are forced to make a conscious choice to resist a temptation. If you have to tell yourself no 50 times an hour because your phone is glowing in your peripheral vision, your prefrontal cortex will eventually suffer from acute ego depletion, and by the 51st time, your hand will reach out automatically to grab the device. The sovereign master does not rely on willpower to resist distractions. You eliminate the need for willpower entirely by designing environments where focus is the path of least resistance and distraction requires excessive physical effort. In behavioral psychology, this is known as manipulating the friction coefficient. When an action is physically easy, immediate, and requires 0 steps to execute, your brain will automatically take it that way. Naturally gravitate toward it whenever it experiences a microsecond of cognitive resistance or boredom. Conversely, when you introduce deliberate physical barriers between yourself and a low-value habit, your primitive brain calculates the required metabolic expenditure and decides that the distraction is simply not worth the effort. To execute this environmental transformation, you must systematically construct a 20-second barrier between your conscious awareness and every non-essential digital trigger. When you enter a hyper-focus deployment, your smartphone does not simply get placed on silent mode on your desk. You physically power it down, place it inside a drawer in an adjacent room, or lock it inside a physical timed container. If you need to access the internet for research, you utilize dedicated browser profiles that have every single entertainment platform, news outlet, and shopping site completely hard-blocked at the system host level. By forcing your body to stand up, walk 20 steps to another room, or input a complex 30-character password to access a distraction, you create a temporal buffer that interrupts the automatic, unconscious habit loop. In that 20-second gap, your rational prefrontal cortex has enough time to come back online, evaluate the impulse, and consciously redirect your attention back to the primary mission. Furthermore, we must address the critical danger of internal distractions, which often masquerade as urgent, high-priority tasks. The moment you sit down to execute a demanding, high-leverage objective that stretches your intellectual capabilities, your brain will experience a sudden surge of cognitive discomfort. Because your survival software is wired to conserve energy and avoid strain, it will immediately attempt to sabotage your deep work session by generating artificial feelings of urgency. It will whisper into your ear that you suddenly need to organize your digital filing system, clean your desk, reply to a routine administrative message, or check an inconsequential financial metric right now. The bungler falls for this psychological trick every single time, abandoning their critical project to engage in what productivity experts call pseudo-work, low-stakes, easy administrative activities that feel productive on the surface but create zero real-world value. To neutralize these internal sabotage routines, you must deploy the distraction capture ledger. Before you open your primary working document, place a blank physical sheet of paper and a pen directly beside your keyboard. The instant and unrelated thought, sudden errand, or urge to check an administrative detail flashes across your consciousness, do not switch tabs and do not act upon it. Pick up the pen, write the item down in 3 words on your ledger, and immediately return your eyes to the central objective. By writing it down, you satisfy your brain's open-loop anxiety, assuring your subconscious mind that the task will not be forgotten. You have successfully captured the distraction without allowing it to hijack your working
Memory, keeping your attentional spotlight burning brightly on the one task that truly moves the needle of your life. While hyperfocus is the primary engine for executing complex, high-leverage tasks, it represents only one half of the complete cognitive operating system. To achieve true intellectual dominance, you must master its essential counterpart, the deliberate practice of scatterfocus. The uncalibrated mind views any moment of wandering attention as wasted time, believing that peak performance requires keeping the brain locked in a state of intense, hyper-focused strain for 8 to 10 hours every day. This is a catastrophic biological mistake that leads directly to cognitive exhaustion, mental burnout, and creative bankruptcy. Your prefrontal cortex is a metabolic organ that consumes massive amounts of glucose during focused execution. Attempting to force continuous focus without structured rest depletes your brain's neurochemical reserves, causing your attention to fray, your error rate to spike, and your decision-making quality to degrade rapidly. Scatterfocus is not mindless procrastination. It is the intentional, strategic release of your attentional spotlight, allowing your mind to wander freely across a vast landscape of thoughts, memories, and future possibilities. When you deliberately shift out of hyperfocus and enter scatterfocus, your brain's default mode network comes online. But rather than allowing it to run wild with anxiety and rumination, you direct this network into one of 3 productive modes: capture mode, problem-solving mode, and creative synthesis mode. In capture mode, you give your mind the freedom to roam while holding a notepad, simply recording every uncompleted loop, forgotten idea, or pending priority that bubbles up from the subconscious basement. In problem-solving mode, you hold a single, highly complex strategic challenge in the back of your awareness while engaging in a low-demand physical activity, such as taking a walk in nature, doing light physical stretching, or washing the dishes.
Because your working memory is not occupied by heavy analytical tasks, your subconscious mind can quietly connect disparate dots, cross-reference distant memories, and assemble novel solutions that would never occur to you during the narrow tunnel vision of intense focus. This brings us to creative synthesis mode, the ultimate source of breakthrough insight and visionary thinking. Every profound creative realization in human history, the sudden eureka moment in the shower, the revolutionary business idea on a quiet walk, the elegant code architecture designed away from the keyboard, happens during scatterfocus. When your attention is intensely focused, you are zooming in on a single tree. When your attention scatters deliberately, you zoom out to perceive the entire forest and the hidden pathways connecting distant clearings. The sovereign master structures their daily workflow as a rhythmic dance between these two states. You execute 90 minutes of absolute high-intensity hyperfocus to push your primary project forward, followed by 30 minutes of deliberate scatterfocus to recharge your attentional space, integrate new insights, and allow your subconscious processors to prepare your next strategic moves. You do not view rest as the opposite of productivity. You recognize it as an essential phase of the creative cycle that turns raw effort into lasting genius. To maximize the raw computing power of your attentional stage, you must now master the systematic protocol of working memory expansion and cognitive energy management. The size and durability of your working memory are not fixed biological traits set in stone. They behave like physical muscles that adapt, expand, or atrophy based on how you train and fuel them every single day. The bungler treats their mental energy as an infinite, abstract resource, pushing through mid-afternoon brain fog by consuming excessive caffeine and sugary stimulants, a desperate low-tier strategy that triggers severe neurochemical spikes followed by catastrophic cognitive crashes. The sovereign master treats the biological hardware of the brain with the precision of an elite aerospace engineer. You understand that your prefrontal cortex relies on a continuous, stable supply of oxygen, hydration, and glucose to sustain high-altitude intellectual performance without suffering structural fatigue. Consider the profound impact of intentional physical recovery on your cognitive bandwidth. When your brain is running continuous analytical calculations, metabolic waste products, including adenosine, accumulate within your neural pathways, physically clogging the receptors responsible for alertness and clear signal transmission. If you fail to clear this biological static, your attentional spotlight dims and your ability to resist impulsive distractions drops to zero. To maintain peak working memory capacity throughout the day, you must implement the ultradian rhythm optimization protocol. The human nervous system is biologically hardwired to operate in 90-minute cycles of high energy followed by 20-minute natural dips in alertness. Instead of fighting this biological tide with artificial stimulants, you honor the rhythm. The moment you complete a 90-minute block of deep hyperfocus, you immediately disengage from all high-intensity cognitive processing. You step away from all glowing screens, hydrate your system with clean water and essential electrolytes, and expose your ocular perimeter to natural sunlight for at least 10 minutes. This simple, non-negotiable somatic reset flushes the metabolic debris from your neural receptors, allowing your working memory to reboot and return to full processing capacity for your next deep deployment. Furthermore, we must deconstruct the practice of cognitive load offloading, the deliberate design of external physical systems to protect your mental stage from unnecessary administrative clutter. Every minor decision you make throughout your day, what clothes to wear in the morning, what to eat for lunch, where you left your keys, or how to organize routine administrative files, consumes a measurable microdose of your daily decision-making capital. By the time you sit down to execute your most critical strategic work in the afternoon, your executive control center is running on fumes, rendering you vulnerable to procrastination and shallow distractions. The sovereign master automates, standardizes, and externalizes all low-leverage variables of daily existence. You establish rigid, minimalist routines for your nutrition, wardrobe, and physical workspace, completely eliminating decision fatigue around trivial matters. You build an external digital and physical second brain, a clean, organized database of notes, templates, and checklists that securely holds your reference data, ensuring your active working memory remains completely unoccupied, pristine, and ready to deploy 100% of its raw computational power onto your master projects. Let us also analyze the transformative power of daily attentional meditation as a direct strength training routine for your prefrontal cortex. Most people approach meditation as a vague spiritual exercise, but from a perspective of pure cognitive mechanics, it is the ultimate resistance training for mental focus. When you sit in absolute physical stillness, close your eyes, and focus your entire attention exclusively on the physical sensation of your breath entering and leaving your nostrils, you are choosing a single, subtle object of attention. The instant your primitive default mode network attempts to hijack your focus with an anxious thought or a random memory, you execute the core cognitive movement. You recognize the drift, detach from the narrative, and calmly guide the spotlight back to the physical breath. Doing this for just 15 minutes every single morning physically increases the gray matter density in your prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, while reducing the volume of your reactive amygdala. You are not just sitting quietly, you are forging an ironclad neurological muscle that makes deep hyperfocus your default state of being in every waking moment of your life. Now that you have expanded your attentional space and stabilized your biological energy, we must analyze the ultimate cognitive destination of intentional focus, the induction and maintenance of the flow state. Flow is the optimal state of human performance, where you become so thoroughly absorbed in what you are doing that the boundary between you and the task dissolves completely. In the landscape of cognitive neuroscience, this phenomenon is accompanied by transient hypofrontality, the temporary downregulation of the brain's dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is the exact region responsible for your inner critic, your self-doubt, your persistent sense of past regrets, or future anxieties.
This inner critic is silenced, your brain stops wasting processing power on self-monitoring. Time dilates, complex patterns reveal themselves with effortless clarity, and your execution speed accelerates to levels that feel almost supernatural. The bungler believes that entering this flow state is a matter of luck, inspiration, or artistic mood, waiting around passively for the muse to strike. The sovereign master treats flow as a repeatable biological formula governed by precise neurological triggers. The primary trigger for entering flow is the exact calibration of the challenge to skill ratio. If a task is significantly more difficult than your current skill level, your amygdala interprets the difficulty as a threat, flooding your system with anxiety and triggering a fight or flight avoidance response. If a task is significantly below your skill level, your brain experiences acute under-arousal, prompting your attentional spotlight to drift toward low-value distractions to satisfy its dopamine hunger. Flow exists exclusively in the narrow, high-voltage channel where the challenge of the task sits approximately 4% beyond your current comfort zone. It must stretch your intellectual hardware just enough to demand 100% of your working memory, but not enough to trigger structural panic. To consistently trigger this state during your hyperfocus blocks, you must implement the granular micro-objective protocol. A massive, vaguely defined objective, such as writing an entire book, designing an entire corporate infrastructure, or analyzing a massive dataset, is too broad to hold your spotlight with laser precision. The sheer scale of the project creates cognitive drag, allowing doubt and hesitation to creep into your attentional space. You must break the monolithic objective down into immediate, microscopic milestones that possess absolute clarity.
You do not sit down to write a chapter. You sit down to execute the precise logical argument of the next 3 paragraphs within 25 minutes. You do not sit down to build a complete software application. You sit down to solve the specific algorithm governing a single module. By giving your brain an unambiguous, immediate target with real-time feedback, you eliminate all ambiguity, locking your prefrontal cortex into the present moment and triggering the immediate neurochemical cascade of dopamine, norepinephrine, and anandamide that anchors you deep within the flow channel. Furthermore, you must protect this state through the ruthless enforcement of cognitive boundary sovereignty in your professional and personal networks. The modern workplace operates on the destructive myth of hyper-responsiveness, where individuals are rewarded for replying to non-critical messages within 60 seconds at the expense of ever doing meaningful, deep work. If you allow your peers and colleagues to interrupt your focus blocks with casual questions and low-stakes requests, you are volunteering to remain an average, fragmented performer. You must train the surrounding network to respect your deep work windows. Establish clear, predictable communication cadences, informing your team of your asynchronous availability windows, where you process inquiries in bulk, while keeping your deep work hours completely dark, silent, and protected. True high performers are judged not by how fast they reply to an email, but by the extraordinary quality and systemic impact of the masterworks they deliver to the world. To ensure that your newly installed focus infrastructure does not deteriorate when life becomes unpredictable, we must now examine the clinical mechanics of attentional inoculation and chaotic resilience. The uncalibrated mind builds a fragile productivity routine that only functions under lab-grade conditions: a silent room, perfect lighting, zero external noise, and high emotional motivation. The moment a child knocks on the door, an unexpected emergency hits the workplace, or sleep is compromised, their entire routine collapses into an emotional heap of frustration and defeat. The sovereign master trains for the storm, not just the calm seas. You recognize that real-world environments are inherently chaotic, noisy, and full of friction. You do not demand a frictionless world. You build an anti-fragile attentional engine that can lock onto a target regardless of ambient turbulence. To forge this resilience, you must practice the protocol of deliberate focus stress testing. During lower-stakes execution blocks, you intentionally place yourself in suboptimal environments: a bustling cafe with overlapping conversations, a commuter train, or a room with minor ambient distractions. You sit down with a single clear micro-objective and deliberately practice drawing your attentional spotlight back the millisecond an ambient sound threatens to pull your awareness away. You treat external noise not as an infuriating violation of your peace, but as free resistance weight to train your anterior cingulate cortex. By proving to your brain that focus is an internal choice rather than an external privilege, you strip the environment of its power to disrupt your work, giving you the ability to drop into deep, surgical hyperfocus anywhere, anytime, under any conditions. Furthermore, we must address the critical danger of the focus rebound trap, the psychological vulnerability that strikes immediately after you complete an intense, successful deep work block. When you finish a 90-minute session of flawless concentration, your brain experiences a natural drop in dopamine. In that exact moment of post-execution fatigue, your primitive survival software whispers that you have earned a reward, urging you to open an infinite scroll application or consume high-stimulation digital junk. If you surrender to this impulse, you instantly flood your freshly cleared working memory with chaotic digital residue, wiping out the neural integration benefits of your focus session and leaving you feeling mentally fractured for the rest of the day. The sovereign master protects the post-focus transition window with absolute discipline. You reward your brain with low-stimulation, restorative inputs: a quiet walk without headphones,
5 minutes of deep diaphragmatic breathing, a glass of mineral-rich water, or simple physical stretching. You give your subconscious mind the clean, quiet space it needs to consolidate the complex neural connections forged during hyperfocus, turning temporary intellectual effort into permanent cognitive capacity. Let us also deconstruct the compounding power of attentional consistency over the span of months and years. Most people dramatically underestimate what can be achieved through 2 uninterrupted hours of daily hyperfocus. They believe that success requires chaotic 14-hour workdays filled with frantic multitasking, endless meetings, and superficial busywork. This is a severe mathematical illusion. 2 hours of pure, undistracted deep work where 100% of your cognitive bandwidth is directed at a single high-leverage problem produces more raw, high-value output than an entire week of fragmented, distracted effort. When you protect that 2-hour window every single day, you trigger a massive compound interest curve in your skills, your output quality, and your intellectual authority. You master complex domains in months while others struggle for decades. You build projects of breathtaking depth, precision, and beauty, while the surrounding world continues to drown in a shallow sea of digital noise. To expand your attentional sovereignty beyond solo cognitive labor and into the social and relational grid, we must examine the protocol of interpersonal attentional dominance. In the modern professional and personal ecosystem, most human interactions are defined by chronic mental absence. People sit in critical boardroom negotiations, strategic team alignments, and intimate conversations with their attentional spotlights split into a dozen fragmented shards. They nod superficially while mentally drafting an email, checking their smartwatch beneath the table rim, or running internal anxious rehearsals about their next conversational turn. This fragmented presence is not merely a social discourtesy, it is a severe strategic liability. The bungler leaks attention continuously, missing the vital micro-expressions, subtle linguistic omissions, and shifts in vocal resonance that reveal the true intentions, hidden anxieties, and structural leverage points of the other party. The sovereign master deploys relational hyperfocus as an elite strategic and interpersonal instrument. When you enter an interaction of high consequence, you execute a total, conscious sweep of your attentional stage, deliberately removing every external device, mental agenda, and self-conscious internal commentary. You project your entire attentional spotlight with absolute, unyielding intensity on the target node. You do not merely listen to their surface vocabulary, you absorb their entire somatic readout, the precise timing of their breathing pauses, the micro shifts in posture, and the tenor and pacing of their voice with intricate attention to detail. Tension flaring along their jawline, the direction of their gaze when high-stakes metrics are introduced, and the emotional resonance underpinning their statements. This level of total, unadulterated presence is so rare in the modern distracted landscape that it operates with almost hypnotic force upon the human nervous system. When an asset experiences the rare sensation of being fully, deeply heard without conversational interruption or divided attention, their instinctive defensive barriers naturally dissolve. Their limbic core down-regulates its suspicion scanners, processing your presence not as an adversarial competitor, but as a grounded, rare source of profound stability and psychological safety. In this state of lowered defense, they involuntarily disclose their real operational constraints, their true baseline motivations, and the unwritten parameters of the deal. By choosing to direct absolute focus outward rather than consuming processing power on internal self-promotion, you retain the ultimate informational advantage in every room you occupy. Furthermore, we must deconstruct the mechanics of social distraction inoculation, the essential defense matrix required to protect your attentional capital from opportunistic energy vampires and chronic complainers.
In any collective environment, you will encounter individuals whose primary habit is the involuntary distribution of their own internal chaos. They interrupt your deep focus blocks with trivial administrative drama, manufactured emergencies, and circular grievances that produce zero actionable resolution. The uncalibrated mind allows these emotional intrusions to breach their perimeter, sacrificing hours of valuable working memory to soothe another person's self-inflicted storm. The sovereign master maintains rigid attentional border control. When low-leverage social noise attempts to penetrate your workspace, you do not meet it with reactive anger or passive-aggressive compliance, both of which burn precious glucose and leave lingering attention residue. You deploy the clinical redirection protocol. You acknowledge their presence with calm facial stillness, validate their emotional state in a single, concise sentence, and instantly demand the concrete, actionable bottom line. What is the single operational decision required from me right now to resolve this? If no actionable decision exists, you smoothly terminate the transaction and return your spotlight to your primary masterwork. You do not permit external chaos to rent free space on your mental stage.
To integrate this entire cognitive discipline into a permanent, lifelong architecture of exceptional output and mental sovereignty, we must now build the personal operating engine of perpetual focus. True mastery over your attention is not a temporary sprint you engage in when deadlines loom, nor is it a rigid productivity hack that you discard the moment life becomes complicated. It is the core operating system of your life, running silently beneath every single thought, action, and ambition. When you look across the landscape of human history, the individuals who built enduring legacies, the philosophers who unlocked the deepest truths of the mind, the inventors who re-engineered civilization, the strategists who commanded great enterprises, were not gifted with more hours in a day, nor did they possess superhuman biology. Their singular advantage was their refusal to allow the trivial, reactive noise of the world to dictate the contents of their attentional space. They treated their mind as a sacred sanctum, guarding its perimeter with ruthless intentionality and directing its focused power exclusively toward the masterworks that altered their reality. Consider the daily rhythm of this sovereign existence. You do not begin your day by surrendering your mental sovereignty to a handheld glowing device. You do not allow the algorithms of external corporations to determine the first neurochemical inputs of your morning. Before the world awakens with its endless barrage of demands, manufactured crises, and superficial updates, you claim the opening hours of the day as your sacred incubation window. You hydrate your biology, align your somatic posture with quiet, unshakable dignity, and spend 10 minutes in deep, non-reactive meditation to clear every lingering particle of attentional residue from your working memory. When you sit down to execute your work, you do so not with hesitation or self-doubt, but with the calm, focused certainty of a master craftsman stepping up to the stone. You enter your hyper-focus blocks with absolute friction architecture in place, devices locked down, notifications annihilated, and your single micro-objective illuminated beneath the spotlight of your conscious awareness. When the deep work session reaches its natural conclusion, you do not plunge into the dopamine trap of mindless digital consumption. You transition with deliberate grace into scatterfocus. You walk beneath the open sky, letting your gaze widen to take in the horizon, allowing your default mode network to quietly weave together the complex neural threads you forged during your focus blocks. You give your brain the space to rest, to heal, and to generate the revolutionary creative insights that only emerge in the quiet spaces between effort. You treat your physical body, your sleep hygiene, your nutrition, your hydration, and your physical movement not as an afterthought, but as the indispensable hardware that fuels your intellectual engine. You understand with absolute scientific certainty that you cannot command high-altitude focus from an exhausted, inflamed, and depleted biology. As you step forward from this moment, let go of the exhausting delusion that you must constantly multitask, react to every ping, and keep up with the endless, shallow stream of modern information.
Multitasking is the desperate coping mechanism of the unfocused mind. Hyperfocus is the weapon of the sovereign creator. The world will continue to accelerate its production of cheap, addictive digital noise. Let the masses remain trapped in the chaotic, reactive fog of fragmented attention, chasing hollow microdoses of dopamine while their dreams and potentials quietly wither away. That is their chosen path. Yours is different. You now hold the master key to the human operating system. You know how to clear your attentional stage, how to construct impenetrable environmental boundaries, how to enter effortless flow, and how to harness both laser-like focus and boundless creative wonder to build a life of extraordinary depth, influence, and enduring triumph. Protect your attention with your life, for your attention is the raw material from which your destiny is forged. The spotlight is yours. The noise has ceased. The signal is absolute, and you are entirely in control. Let us deconstruct the precise mechanical execution of the deep reading cognitive recalibration, one of the most potent neuroplastic training exercises available to the modern mind. In an age dominated by bullet points, summaries, and digital skimming, the human ability to follow a complex, multi-layered argument across hundreds of continuous pages has suffered catastrophic atrophy. When you read digital content, your ocular scanning pattern shifts into an F shape, frantically hunting for bold words, subheadings, and quick conclusions while discarding the nuanced logical architecture that connects them. To reverse this structural degradation, you must introduce structured periods of deep analog reading into your daily routine. You select dense, demanding literature, such as classical philosophy, technical treatises, or rigorous historical analyses, and engage with the physical, printed page for 45 uninterrupted minutes with 0 digital devices present in your physical coordinate. When your brain experiences the inevitable surge of restlessness and demands a quick dopamine hit, you do not yield. You force your ocular tracking to remain locked on the linear progression of the sentences, actively visualizing the author's conceptual framework and challenging their premises in real time. This deliberate cognitive resistance training acts as a heavy deadlift for your working memory, forcing your prefrontal cortex to rebuild its lost stamina and restoring your ability to engage with immense intellectual depth without suffering cognitive fatigue. Furthermore, we must examine the critical concept of cognitive resilience under biological depletion. It is relatively simple to maintain flawless concentration when you are well-rested, physically energized, and emotionally calm, but the true measure of a sovereign master is revealed when the biological baseline is compromised, when sleep has been disrupted by travel, when physical illness introduces baseline fatigue, or when personal crises demand immense emotional processing power. The bungler uses physical fatigue as an immediate excuse to surrender their attentional borders, allowing their day to degenerate into mindless scrolling and passive consumption. The sovereign master deploys adaptive attentional triage. When your biological reserves are low, you do not attempt to force 6 hours of high-intensity creative synthesis. Doing so would only trigger neurochemical burnout and damage your internal self-trust. Instead, you scale down the scope of your objectives while maintaining the absolute purity of your focus. You select one single, mechanically clear microtask that requires minimal creative leaps but high systematic execution, such as auditing technical metrics, organizing project assets, or drafting routine strategic blueprints. You execute that single task with complete, undistracted presence for a single 30-minute block, and then you grant your body full, guilt-free physiological recovery. By maintaining the unbroken standard of single-task focus, even during states of physical limitation, you prove to your internal system that your standard is non-negotiable. Your subconscious mind that your focus is an unyielding law of your identity rather than a fragile circumstance of your mood. Let us also analyze the transformative power of strategic ignorance, the conscious, deliberate decision to remain completely uninformed about low-leverage cultural noise, transient political controversies, and celebrity spectacles. The modern digital economy operates on the predatory assumption that you have a civic or social obligation to possess an immediate, highly emotional opinion on every event occurring across the globe in real time. This is a weaponized illusion designed to siphon away your finite cognitive bandwidth. Every piece of trivial information you allow into your awareness claims a permanent lease on your subconscious working memory, generating background cognitive noise that actively interferes with your masterworks. The sovereign master embraces radical, unapologetic information filtering. You do not watch breaking news broadcasts engineered to generate visceral panic. You do not engage in internet debates that produce zero material change. You do not consume cultural gossip that has zero relevance to your strategic mission. When people ask for your opinion on the latest fleeting internet controversy, you state with calm, quiet confidence that you have no data on the matter and return your attention to your work. By ruthlessly closing your mental borders to the trivial affairs of the distracted masses, you preserve a pristine reservoir of mental clarity that allows you to direct all your cognitive firepower toward the creation of things that truly endure. To bring this entire cognitive system to its ultimate operational apex, we must dissect the mechanics of chronobiological attentional synchrony, the precise alignment of your highest leverage cognitive tasks with your body's natural circadian and ultradian bioenergetic peaks. Most individuals approach their workday with a completely flat, indiscriminate strategy. They schedule high-stakes strategic planning, intense creative synthesis, and deep analytical problem-solving during mid-afternoon windows when their core body temperature is dropping, their adenosine levels are peaking, and their executive control centers are running at their lowest metabolic efficiency. They then wonder why they experience excruciating mental friction and succumb to trivial distractions. The sovereign master rejects this biological blindness. You understand that cognitive performance is an oscillating biological wave governed by precise hormonal surges, cortisol awakening responses, and natural fluctuations in neurotransmitter density. By mapping your unique chronotype, identifying whether your natural cognitive peak occurs in the crisp silence of the early dawn or the deep stillness of the late night, you position your deepest hyperfocus blocks exclusively within your biological prime time. During these 2 to 3 hour windows of peak alertness, your prefrontal cortex operates with maximum synaptic efficiency, allowing you to solve complex technical problems and produce masterworks in a fraction of the time it would take during a biological valley. You protect these hours with uncompromising ruthlessness, treating them as non-negotiable strategic assets where interruptions are strictly forbidden. You delegate routine administrative tasks, low-friction communications, and mechanical organization exclusively to your natural biological valleys, ensuring that not a single drop of your highest-grade mental energy is ever squandered on low-value labor. Furthermore, we must address the mastery of attentional recovery and sleep architecture, the indispensable biological engine that cleanses and recharges your cognitive hardware. When you enter deep, slow-wave sleep and rapid eye movement phases, your brain's glymphatic system activates, expanding the interstitial space between your neurons to pump cerebrospinal fluid through your brain tissue. This biological wash cycle systematically flushes away the accumulated metabolic waste products of a demanding workday, including beta-amyloid proteins and cellular debris that cause cognitive fog and degraded attention spans. Simultaneously, your hippocampus and neocortex engage in rapid memory consolidation, transferring the insights and neural connections forged during your hyperfocus sessions into permanent long-term memory structures. If you chronically compromise your sleep architecture, staying up late in the presence of blue-spectrum artificial light, or consuming stimulants late in the afternoon, you actively prevent this nightly neural maintenance. You wake up attempting to run high-level cognitive software on an inflamed, toxic physical engine. The Sovereign Master establishes an inviolable sleep hygiene protocol, eliminating artificial screens 90 minutes before bed, optimizing the sleeping coordinate for absolute darkness and cool temperatures, and honoring the 8-hour restorative cycle as the primary foundation of their intellectual dominance. Finally, consider the monumental transformation that occurs when you maintain this standard of absolute mental focus over a lifetime. In a modern culture that continues to fracture its attention into smaller and more meaningless fragments, your ability to sustain deep, laser-sharp hyperfocus transforms you into a singular force of nature. While the masses remain trapped in the chaotic swirl of digital noise, chasing superficial validation and drowning in chronic anxiety, you operate from an immovable fortress of calm, clarity, and extraordinary creative output. You master complex disciplines with effortless speed, execute ambitious long-term visions with surgical precision, and experience the profound inner peace that only comes from knowing you are the absolute master of your own mind. You have reclaimed your most precious currency. You have built an impenetrable perimeter around your mind.
Consciousness. Your attentional spotlight is focused, your path is unobstructed, and your destiny is entirely within your command. Let us now investigate the profound interplay between your attentional capacity and your autonomic nervous system through the protocol of physiological arousal modulation. The brain does not operate as an isolated computational processor floating in a vacuum. It is intimately bound to the continuous feedback loops ascending from your heart, lungs, and gut via the vagus nerve. When your sympathetic nervous system is hyperactivated, characterized by shallow thoracic breathing, elevated resting heart rate, and chronic muscular bracing, your brain receives continuous biological telemetry signaling imminent danger. In response to this perceived threat, the prefrontal cortex automatically restricts its cognitive aperture, shifting into a narrow survival scanning mode that prioritizes rapid threat detection over deep, reflective analysis. You cannot achieve true hyperfocus or profound creative synthesis while your nervous system is trapped in a low-grade state of chronic physiological arousal. The Sovereign Master practices active autonomic regulation prior to every major intellectual engagement. You do not simply sit down and demand instant focus from an agitated physiology. You deploy the physiological sigh, a dual nasal inhalation followed by a long, unforced oral exhalation, repeated 3 to 4 times. This specific respiratory pattern rapidly increases intrathoracic pressure, activating the baroreceptors in your cardiovascular system and signaling the sinoatrial node of the heart to slow its pacing. Within 60 seconds, the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system engages, flooding your brain with signals of somatic safety. In this grounded physiological calm, your prefrontal cortex receives the metabolic green light to expand its working memory capacity, allowing you to enter deep, sustained concentration with zero internal friction. Furthermore, we must examine the discipline of attentional triage and the rule of radical elimination. The modern intellectual landscape suffers from an epidemic of chronic overcommitment, where individuals attempt to apply intense focus to 20 distinct projects simultaneously. This is a fundamental violation of cognitive physics. Focus is a subtractive art, not an additive one. To double the intensity of your focus on what truly matters, you must divide by 2 the number of priorities you are actively entertaining. The Sovereign Master performs regular, ruthless audits of their commitments, categorizing every project into binary terms. Either it represents a generational, high-leverage masterwork that commands your absolute dedication, or it is a distraction that must be delegated, automated, or eliminated. Entirely.
You develop the rare courage to say no to good opportunities in order to preserve the uncompromised cognitive space required to build great ones. Consider also the long-term mental clarity that results from practicing digital fasting and neural detoxification. Just as the physical body requires periods of digestive rest to repair cellular structures and maintain metabolic sensitivity, your brain requires structured intervals of complete digital silence to restore its baseline dopamine sensitivity. When you spend months constantly consuming information from morning to night, your dopamine receptors downregulate, making ordinary, quiet, and meaningful tasks feel unbearably boring. By instituting a weekly 24-hour digital fast, a full day completely devoid of screens, notifications, and media consumption, you allow your neural baseline to recalibrate. The quiet beauty of the physical world returns, your natural curiosity reignites, and your capacity to sit with complex, deep ideas without craving artificial stimulation is fully restored. You reclaim the childlike wonder and unbroken concentration that define the truly sovereign mind. To sustain this elevated level of cognitive mastery over decades, we must analyze the protocol of attentional asset allocation and the deep work horizon. When you examine how the highest performing thinkers structure their lifespan, you find that they do not view their intellectual career as an endless, undifferentiated sprint. They operate on long-range seasonal rhythms, dividing their calendar into distinct strategic epochs: acquisition phases, execution phases, and consolidation phases. During an acquisition phase, your attentional bandwidth is dedicated almost exclusively to aggressive deep reading, high-volume data ingestion, and rigorous conceptual synthesis, expanding the raw parameters of your mental models. During an execution phase, you enter a strict informational blackout, locking down all incoming data streams to channel your accumulated knowledge into the singular creation of a master asset, a book, an architectural framework, a technological prototype, or an enterprise strategy. During the consolidation phase, you deliberately drop the intensity of your cognitive demands, engaging in active physical recovery, nature immersion, and low-friction reflection, allowing your subconscious mind to solidify new neural architectures before the next cycle begins. The bungler fails because they attempt to execute all three phases simultaneously every single day of the year. They try to learn new complex skills while simultaneously building a major venture, replying to frantic daily communications, and agonizing over their long-term trajectory. This chronic diffusion of cognitive resources creates structural mental stagnation. By introducing seasonal macro focus to your life, you eliminate the underlying friction of divided priorities. When you are in an execution phase, you feel zero guilt about ignoring peripheral opportunities,
because you know your system is calibrated for one singular output. You trust the rhythm of your cognitive investments, knowing that compound interest requires sustained, uninterrupted concentration over significant horizons of time. Furthermore, we must deconstruct the subtle phenomenon of attentional contagion in high-performance teams. If you operate as a leader, creator, or strategic driver within a collective enterprise, the quality of your personal focus directly sets the baseline cognitive frequency for your entire network. When a leader is chronically reactive, sending fragmented emails late at night, calling spontaneous, unscheduled meetings, and demanding instant replies to low-stakes inquiries, they impose an enormous cognitive tax on every asset within their organization. They force their entire team to operate in a continuous state of defensive vigilance and shallow reactivity, destroying the organization's collective ability to produce groundbreaking innovations. The sovereign master leads through structural attentional calm. You model radical presence in every interaction and protect the deep work windows of your team with unyielding discipline.
You design asynchronous communication systems where clarity and depth of thought are rewarded over speed of reply. You replace long, chaotic meetings with concise, written strategic memorandums that must be read and analyzed in silence before any verbal discussion occurs. By cultivating an institutional culture of high-density focus and low-friction calm, you turn your collective organization into an unstoppable intellectual force capable of out-thinking, out-innovating, and out-executing every fragmented competitor in the marketplace. Finally, remember that the mastery of attention is not merely a tool for professional dominance or creative output. It is the fundamental prerequisite for a meaningful human existence. The quality of your life is ultimately determined by the quality of your conscious moments. When you master your attention, you regain the ability to look deeply into the eyes of the people you love without mental distraction. You regain the capacity to sit in absolute silence with your own thoughts and feel deep, unshakable contentment. You become fully awake to the beauty, complexity, and wonder of the world around you. You are no longer an automated biological machine driven by unconscious instincts and external algorithms. You are the deliberate, sovereign author of your own reality, moving through the world with absolute presence, profound clarity, and unmatched purpose. The fortress is built, the signal is pure, the spotlight is yours. Let us now investigate the profound discipline of attentional environment.
Geometry, the science of configuring your spatial coordinates of your physical surroundings to automatically induce sustained cognitive depth. The human brain is an intensely spatial organ. The visual cortex continuously processes peripheral spatial data to determine your level of environmental safety and cognitive posture. When your immediate physical workspace is cluttered with disconnected objects, open paperwork, and visual clutter, your visual processing centers are forced to execute continuous microsaccades, rapid involuntary eye movements that register peripheral data points. Each of these subconscious visual registrations consumes a subtle fraction of your daily metabolic energy, creating an invisible baseline of low-grade cognitive drag. The sovereign master designs an environment of radical spatial minimalism. You treat your primary working surface as an operating table of absolute purity. When you engage in deep hyperfocus, the only physical objects permitted within your field of vision are the immediate tools required to execute the masterwork at hand. By removing all ambient visual static, you eliminate the sensory triggers that invite subconscious mind-wandering. Furthermore, you exploit the neurological phenomenon known as context-dependent attentional priming. By dedicating specific, invariant physical locations exclusively to high-intensity deep work and never using those specific chairs or desks for passive entertainment, casual browsing, or social communication, you train your nervous system to form an unbreakable associative link. The physical act of sitting in that specific coordinate acts as an automated somatic trigger that immediately drops your brainwaves into the high-focus beta and theta bandwidths, allowing you to bypass mental resistance and enter surgical concentration within seconds. Furthermore, we must address the mastery of cognitive stamina preservation and the architecture of non-reaction. In any high-stakes professional arena, you will constantly encounter unexpected friction, sudden operational setbacks, volatile communications from external nodes, and erratic demands that threaten to fracture your daily schedule. The uncalibrated mind reacts to every unexpected ripple with immediate emotional inflation, burning massive reserves of prefrontal glucose on outrage, panic, and hurried damage control. This emotional turbulence leaves the attentional stage thoroughly compromised for the remainder of the day. The sovereign master practices absolute emotional stillness in the presence of disruption. You implement the 5-minute buffer rule.
When an urgent crisis or high-friction communication enters your perimeter, you do not allow your fingers to immediately fire back a reactive response, nor do you permit the interruption to derail your active focus block. You take a slow, diaphragmatic breath, log the event into your external capture ledger, and enforce a mandatory 5-minute delay before taking any deliberate action. In that 5-minute gap, the initial surge of adrenaline
Dissipates, preventing your primitive amygdala from hijacking your prefrontal cortex. You evaluate the situation with flat, clinical objectivity, determining the precise, minimal intervention required to resolve the issue, without sacrificing your primary strategic focus. By choosing calculated response over primitive reaction, you preserve the pristine clarity of your mental stage, ensuring your highest cognitive faculties remain permanently dedicated to the execution of your masterworks. Let us now investigate the profound mechanism of the dopaminergic baseline reset, the neurochemical calibration required to sustain elite cognitive stamina without suffering emotional burnout or chronic motivational decay. In the modern sensory environment, the human reward system is subjected to an unnatural, hyper-concentrated bombardment of artificial stimuli. Algorithmically engineered social feeds, high-speed entertainment, instant messaging, and frictionless consumer feedback loops. Each of these interactions delivers a sharp, unnatural spike in synaptic dopamine, but the laws of neurobiology demand balance. Every artificial spike is inevitably followed by a compensatory plunge below your natural baseline. When your baseline dopamine drops, your brain enters a state of mild dysphoria and acute restlessness, interpreting the absence of intense stimulation as painful boredom. In this depleted state, sitting down to read a complex manuscript, write an intricate piece of code, or solve a difficult analytical problem feels like an agonizing chore. The sovereign master protects their neurochemical baseline with uncompromising intentionality. You understand that true intellectual drive is not fueled by chasing chaotic dopamine spikes, but by cultivating a clean, high-sensitivity reward architecture. You practice stimulus decoupling during your work sessions. You do not pair cognitive tasks with background entertainment, passive media consumption, or constant snacking, habits that train the brain to require multiple simultaneous dopamine streams just to tolerate effort. Instead, you train your mind to find deep, intrinsic satisfaction in the raw texture of the work itself, the elegance of a well-structured argument, the precision of a clean solution, and the quiet dignity of sustained effort. When you resensitize your dopamine receptors through disciplined sensory hygiene, the mental friction that makes ordinary focus difficult completely dissolves. Demanding intellectual challenges cease to feel like painful labor. They become deeply engaging, effortless, and profoundly rewarding. Furthermore, we must examine the ultimate synthesis of your attentional power through the dual horizon strategic vision. The uncalibrated mind lives entirely in one of two dysfunctional extremes. Either they are completely trapped in the microscopic details of immediate daily tasks, unable to see the broader strategic landscape, or they remain lost in grand, abstract daydreams, completely disconnected from the daily execution required to manifest them. The sovereign master operates with simultaneous dual horizon awareness. With one eye, you zoom out to maintain an unyielding grasp on your 10-year strategic horizon, your core principles, your overarching masterworks, and the systemic legacy you are building. With the other eye, you zoom in with microscopic, laser-sharp hyperfocus on the immediate 90-minute block directly in front of you, executing the current task with the precision of a surgeon who cares about nothing else in the universe. By anchoring your immediate microfocus to a clear macro vision, you eliminate the existential hesitation that plagues the undisciplined. You no longer question whether your daily effort matters, because every single focused hour is mathematically mapped to your long-term empire.
You move through the world with an immovable sense of purpose, undisturbed by transient market turbulence, cultural distractions, or the opinions of the fragmented crowd. You have mastered the internal machinery of attention, conquered the external friction of the environment, and aligned your daily labor with an enduring vision. Your focus is absolute, your architecture is unbreakable, and your sovereign authority over your mind and destiny is complete. To guarantee that your cognitive empire remains completely invulnerable across every phase of execution, we must now dissect the protocol of attentional invariant auditing. Most individuals operate under the dangerous assumption that once an efficient routine is established, it will automatically sustain itself without conscious oversight. This blind spot leads directly to cognitive drift, the slow, insidious infiltration of micro-distractions that gradually erode your focus over weeks and months until your productivity collapses without an obvious single point of failure. The sovereign master establishes an unyielding weekly audit of attentional expenditure. Every 7 days, you sit in absolute silence with your operational logs, subjecting your daily schedule to flat, clinical scrutiny. You analyze where your attentional currency was actually deployed versus where you intended it to go. You identify the subtle friction points, the casual communication habits that lengthened into 15-minute rabbit holes, the low-priority tasks that quietly found their way back onto your primary attentional stage, and the slight relaxations in your digital perimeter boundaries. By identifying and eliminating these minor leaks before they widen into systemic structural cracks, you ensure that your focus remains sharp, calibrated, and completely impenetrable over the entire trajectory of your life. Furthermore, we must examine the ultimate synthesis of your attentional power through the generative synthesis matrix. When you possess absolute command over both hyperfocus and scatterfocus, you unlock the ability to systematically combine disparate fields of knowledge into revolutionary insights that redefine your
Industry. The bungler remains trapped within the narrow silos of a single domain, repeating established formulas and generating predictable, commoditized output. The sovereign master uses deliberate scatterfocus to roam across classical literature, advanced physics, evolutionary biology, and organizational psychology, collecting high-leverage mental models from the outer boundaries of human knowledge. When you return to the laser-like intensity of hyperfocus, you channel these diverse conceptual assets directly into your primary objective. You do not merely solve problems, you reframe the entire landscape, designing elegant, high-dimensional solutions that competitors operating with fragmented, superficial minds can neither predict nor reproduce. Your cognitive depth becomes your ultimate unfair advantage, allowing you to dominate complex fields with effortless mastery, build lasting monuments of intellectual and practical achievement, and leave an indelible mark upon the world. Let us now investigate the profound discipline of attentional longevity and the mastery of intellectual momentum. In any long-range creative or professional endeavor, the greatest threat to your ultimate success is not the presence of external obstacles, but the subtle, corrosive impact of cognitive fatigue over multi-year horizons. The uncalibrated mind relies entirely on explosive, unsustainable bursts of manic effort, working 18 hours a day during brief phases of inspiration, only to crash into weeks of paralyzing apathy and creative block. This erratic oscillation destroys momentum and degrades self-trust. The sovereign master operates on the principle of rhythmic consistency. You understand that intellectual momentum behaves like physical inertia. It requires immense metabolic energy to initiate from a standstill, but requires remarkably little continuous energy to maintain once in motion.
By committing to a non-negotiable daily quota of deep, uninterrupted hyperfocus, even if limited to a focused 90 minutes during difficult periods, you keep the wheel of momentum turning continuously. You never allow your intellectual engine to go cold, ensuring that every day's output builds seamlessly on the foundation of the previous day, compounding into an overwhelming body of work over time. Furthermore, we must examine the ultimate psychological freedom that emerges from radical attentional detachment. In a culture obsessed with immediate social validation, most people tie their self-worth directly to the external reception of their work, the applause, the view counts, the critical reviews, and the market metrics. When their output is praised, their ego inflates with fragile arrogance.
When output is ignored or criticized, their confidence collapses into profound self-doubt. This emotional reactivity keeps their attentional stage permanently rented out to the erratic moods of the public. The sovereign master practices total detachment from external outcome while maintaining absolute devotion to the internal process. You recognize that the true reward of hyperfocus is not the fleeting praise of the crowd, but the internal transformation that occurs when you push your cognitive faculties to their absolute limits. You judge your success by a single unyielding metric. Did you bring total presence, surgical precision, and uncompromising excellence to the task at hand? When you detach from external metrics and anchor your worth entirely in your commitment to craft, you become completely untouchable by criticism and uncorrupted by praise, moving through the world with the quiet, unshakable authority of a true sovereign.